All right, so let's start. So we are chanting now Durga Suktam, a Vedic hymn dedicated to Durga. And we have learned 3 paragraphs so far, or 3 verses. Today we shall learn to chant the 4th one. Okay, first we shall read the English translation, then we shall chant the 4th verse. Okay. Here, let's chant it, read it together. Okay. We offer our oblations to the fire of Durga to cross over this very difficult ocean of worldly existence. O Jata Veda, one from whom the Vedas are born, you remove great difficulties in all the worlds. Please carry us like a boat in this very difficult ocean of the world, samsara. O Agni, fire of Durga, our minds are invoking you ardently, like sage Atri, who continuously chants the mantras, and our beings are now filled with your consciousness by continuously invoking you. So as I said before, this chant is not so easy, but we took this challenge and we are going on. So the words are here like this: Vishwani no Durgaha Jata Vedaha Sindhunna Nava Durita Ti Parshi Agne Atrivan Manasa Grinano Asmakam Bodhya Vita Tonunam. Okay, let's first try to chant call and response, then together. Vishwani no Durgaha Vishwani no Durgaha Jata Veda Sindhuna Jata Veda Sindhuna Nava Durita Ti Parshi Nava Durita Ti Parshi Agne Atrivan Manasa Agne Atrivan Manasa Grinano o Asmakam Grinano o Asmakam Bodhya Vita Tanuna Am Bodhya Vita Tanuna Am. Okay, let's try to chant it together. Vishwani no Durgaha Jata Vedaha Sindhuna Nava Durita Ti Parshi Agne Atrivan Manasa Grinano o Asmakam Bodha Vita Tanuna Am. Once more. Vishani no durgaha jata veda sindhuna nava turita tiparshi agne atrivan manasa grinano asmakam bodhavita tanuna. All right, 3 more to go. All right, so we are studying Narada Bhakti Sutras, Narada's way of life, and we have come to the third part of the text called How to Cultivate Bhakti. What are the means to achieve the kind of Parabhakti, supreme love for God? This is the topic now Narada is discussing. Narada first started with 2 don'ts, which we should not do. That is, to abstain from sense pleasures and abstain from hankering for them, that we saw in aphorism number 35. Then the do's. First one was in aphorism 36, uninterrupted worship of God. That is, as we understood it, what it means to us is that regular practices, regular devotional practices without any break. It will take a long time before we really gain or can develop that kind of bhakti. Second one was, or rather second and third one was listening and singing God's glories, Shravana and Kirtana. Aphorism 37 that we saw in our last class. And we also saw in our last class that it is this singing and listening to God's glories, Shravana and Kirtana, is in fact first 2 of the 9-fold practices as has been spoken of in the great text called Bhagavatam, Navadha Bhakti, 9 types of devotional practices. So it says, aphorism 37 said that Parabhakti comes from hearing and singing the glories of God, even in the midst of mundane activities. Loke api. Now this word loke api, in the midst of mundane activities, that is how it has been translated in almost all the books that I have referred to. In the midst of mundane activities, a devotee should try to listen and sing God's glories. But to me, it appeared that this word lokyopi could have another meaning. Lokyopi also can mean along with other people. That is, it's a congregational practice, communal practice. Other practice that abstaining from sense pleasures, abstaining from hankering, then uninterrupted worship of God. These are all private practices, right? But if lokyopi we interpret in the sense of in congregation along with other people, that means when you are in a congregation, then sing and listen to God's glories. Because in devotional traditions, communal singing, lot of emphasis is put on communal singing, and communally in a group listening to God's name, God's play, God's activities. that is so popular in devotional tradition. In fact, in throughout India, there is a festival called Bhagavat Katha, where thousands of people gather together to listen to these stories and different glories of God. And also we see that in many Indian temples that devotees gather together and sing kirtana, devotional singing for God. It has a wonderful effect, wonderful effect. Frankly speaking, my introduction to so-called, spiritual life or religious life started with this. As a student, without knowing much, I started, participating in singing, because singing is a enjoyable thing, and a group of friends, we, under the inspiration of another great person, we used to sing. We used to sing a lot every weekend when the classes were off. We used to go to, Dakshineshwar, or even in our own place. We would gather together and sing. It was a joy, singing a few songs together. So it has a wonderful effect. Collectively singing devotional song. Shravana and Kirtana, hearing and singing. So we discussed a bit about hearing and listening. A few more points about that is, according to Jiva Goswami, a great scholar of Bhakti tradition, that he defined Shravana as when the organs of hearing contact the words describing the name, form, qualities, and Leela, pastimes of God, the term Shravana is assigned. Shravana in Vedanta has a different connotation. Here it is different. So according to the Bhakti tradition, that hearing about God is the starting point from which the other 8 processes of Bhakti really develop. And hearing may mean reading too, because hearing is so much emphasized, because at that time there were not many books available. People used to listen to everything through, hearing. Someone used to recite, someone used to explain, and others used to listen. But it might, in our context, may mean reading too, reading about religious books like, say, Bible, or Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, or anything about gods and God's place. The belief, in among the bhaktas is that hearing and reading relate to absorbing the mind in God, who is manifest in sacred word. God is manifest in the sacred word about God's name. Just as in a conventional love affairs, a person becomes attracted with the form, qualities, and activities of a beloved, and when love is in full bloom, one can think of nothing else. So also in bhakti, mind is captivated by God, as encountered in amazing stories contained in devotional texts. So this is the rationale. So hearing about God's Leela or stories is planting the seed of bhakti in the minds of those who are seeking a relationship with God, which ultimately culminate into falling in love with God. Jiva Goswami says further that there should be an order of hearing. That is, first to hear or read about God's name, then about God's form, physical form, then qualities, and finally God's pastime. In that order, if we do the Shravana, then it becomes more effective. That is Shravana, or hearing about God's glories. Second one is Kirtana, singing about God. Singing, chanting, or reciting the names and deeds of God. As we mentioned in our last class, names in Bhakti tradition, name of God is considered to be identical to God. Unlike other words where word is a different thing and the real thing is a different thing, in Bhakti tradition it is believed that God's name and God, they are both identical. They are not different from each other. God's name is the sound or sonal manifestation of God. And in singing, that is in Kirtana, Japa also comes under Kirtana. Japa means repetition of mantra, but it is a private thing rather than communal thing. So the Krishna Bhaktas believe that God takes the form of the mantra, and mantra is called Nama Avatar, sonic incarnation of God. And the mantra is infused with specific power and establishes a relationship with God. As this is important, what I am going to tell you now. As God can appear before a devotee in a personal form, which is called vision of God, so also God can be perceived as sonal presence. That is, devotee can actually feel and experience the presence of God in the form of mantra. So experience of God does not only mean vision of God. It might also mean the mantra, seeing God as mantra, which is called, mantra drishti, seeing, realizing the mantra. Realizing the mantra means perceiving or experiencing God as mantra itself. So Kirtana, we remember, is a Vaidhi practice. That is, it is something we are trying to cultivate. It is not yet pure love for God. It takes quite some time for the natural sweetness of God's name to manifest in the heart of the devotee. If chanted regularly and diligently, then they call the nectar-like sweetness that is in the mantra or in the name that it manifests. And it has, the name or mantra has a profound impact on our subconscious mind. An effect which we cannot understand immediately, but once we understand, once this sweetness develops or sweetness manifests, then frankly speaking, there is nothing more pleasurable in the world than name of God. Some of you might have read the wonderful book called Seeing God Everywhere, written by Swami Ishadhyanananda ji, who was the Swami here. There he writes about this thing, that mantra. He once became so much, engaged, absorbed with mantra, that while repeating the mantra, while doing the japa, he felt the urge to go to the restroom, but he did not want to, because he was hearing the entire universe was chanting God's name. That is, he was not alone chanting God's name. He was hearing that the entire creation is chanting the same mantra that he was chanting. Then he did something. He he was doing the japa practice while sitting on his bed. Then he told his pillow that continue doing the japa, I will be back. Continue doing the japa, I will be back soon. So this is the joy, the bliss of God's name. Another monk I saw closely for many years, that he used to get lost in bliss while chanting God's name. So Narada is saying that these two things are very efficacious for cultivating bhakti. One is listening or reading about God, God's name, God's beauty, God's form, God's pastimes, activities, deeds, and secondly, chanting, singing, or repeating mantra. And it says that loke api, if we take the other meaning, that is the meaning which has been, which we find in most of the books, that even while in the mundane activities, try to do these two things. Then, as we referred to earlier, that we can do that, doing, when we are doing some chores or some less demanding activities like driving, we can always play devotional music. We can play, audiobook even, like, Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna's audiobook is available. So all those things can go on in the background. And also ajapa japa, there is ajapa japa, that is ajapa japa, that is continuous repeating of the mantra with in-breath and out-breath. That also can be done. That is not a very difficult thing. That thing can also be done while engaged in other activities. So summary of this aphorism 37 is, while engaged in other activities or in a congregation, kirtana and shravana are efficacious means of cultivating bhakti in our heart. Shravana and manana. Then the next one, shravana, manana, and the continuous, practice or uninterrupted practice of remembering God. These three have been mentioned. But now Narada will speak about something which is beyond our control. And Narada would say that mukhyata, chiefly, this is what really counts as far as bhakti is concerned. As far as bhakti is concerned, more than self-effort, what really matters is divine grace. So that is aphorism 38. Let's have a look at it. Just a minute. All right, so let's start. Here it is. Okay, aphorism 38. Aphorism 38 is mukhyata tu mahat kripaya eva bhagavat kripa leshat ba. Let's chant it. Mukhyatah tu mahat kripaya eva bhagavat kripa leshat va. Okay, so the syntax is like this: tu mukhyatah kripaya mahat eva va leshat bhagavat kripa. What it means? Tu means but, mukhyatah means mainly, kripaya It should be kripaya, not kripoyo. Okay. Mukhyata, kripaya means that bhakti comes from the grace of mahat, great people. Eva, alone. Va, or leshat, from a bit of Bhagavat Kripa, divine grace. But mainly that bhakti comes from the grace of the great people alone, or from a bit of divine grace. This is very important aphorism, and indeed it is so, I would say, difficult also to convey the importance of this aphorism. Only we can experience it. Okay, let's try to see what this aphorism really speak about. So as I said, the 5 practices so far have been mentioned depend upon one's own effort. This aphorism says that ultimately real bhakti dawns in our heart through grace, either of the great people or a little bit of divine. Can you share the page again? We'll do later on. Okay. Mukhyata means mainly. This is important. In the path of bhakti, divine grace is a central theme. As we saw that real practice of bhakti is surrender to God. And in why surrender to God? There comes the question of seeking divine grace. Devotees feels after some time that divine grace is the most important factor in the path of bhakti. Without divine grace, progress is not possible. Whereas in Jnana Yoga or any wisdom tradition, self-effort is the central theme. A Jnana Yogi believes that their own effort is enough to make them realize their true nature. But in Bhakti Yoga, devotee relies on God. That is, after they have taken or undergone or undertaken lot of self-efforts, then ultimately the devotee surrenders to God for divine grace. We shall come to this topic of self-effort versus divine grace in a moment. Before that, Mahat Kripaya. The word Mahat Kripaya means the grace of the great people. Here comes the question, how the seed of bhakti is planted in our heart. If we look back, all of us are devotees. It always comes from inspiration from other persons who are advanced than us, fairly advanced than us. It was either through a personal contact with a person, or through a book which was written by them, or sometimes it might also come as an inspiration from a song that they wrote. For example, about song, Sri Ramakrishna was very much inspired by the songs written by other realized, singer poets like Ram Prasad. Okay, those songs became a kind of spiritual practice for Sri Ramakrishna. Among these 3 types of influences, personal contact is the most powerful. Swami Vivekananda said in his lecture on Bhakti Yoga, the soul can only receive impulses from another soul, and from nothing else. So really, real inspiration to soul comes from another soul. And the advanced practitioner is called Mahat. And one thing about this is Mahat. We usually will think an illumined person, one who has achieved everything in spiritual life. But it need not be so. They need not be illumined. Okay. It is all very good if we come in contact with an illumined person, but if they are more advanced than us, that will also have its effect on us. Someone told that, seekers always think that I shall get initiation or spiritual inspiration or guidance only from an illumined person. That is very good. But then the thing is, if I am studying in, kindergarten, so my teacher need not be always a PhD holder. Okay. Even someone who is, say, graduate, simple graduate, can also teach me. The thing is, they are advanced than me. So company of such person can also be called Mahat Kripa. As it appears that all of us, as it were, are circulating in an orbit of life. There is an orbit in which we are all circulating. Okay. And we need a push to change our orbit. This push to change our orbit usually comes from an external source. And when we look back, we find that the push was totally unexpected and fortuitous. That is Mahat Kripa. And when the push comes from another person, it is called Mahat Kripa, grace of the great people. But when it comes from within our own soul, it is called Bhagavad Kripa, divine grace. Both of the inspirations give us great impetus in our bhakti path. The divine grace, first of all, Mahat Kripa is difficult to understand how it works. Divine grace is harder to understand. But we can say that both of them are mysterious, illogical. I mean, we cannot rationalize about them, but they have their sure effect on our spiritual life. Now, question is, Mahat Kripa, how to recognize a Mahat? How to recognize a great person? How should I know? Difficult to recognize. Mahat people are really difficult to recognize because Mahat people, they themselves don't say, advertise that I am Mahat. This is one thing about Mahat people. If somebody says, hey, come here, I am illumined one, so we should beware of them. But there are, signs that we find in the scripture. Bhagavatam itself says, Mahantate samachitta prashantaha bhimannavaha suridaha sadhava ye. How to recognize Mahat people? They are samachitta, that is equanimous. They are impartial. Then prashantaha, they are calm. We don't find them agitated. Then bhimannavaha, that is, they don't have ill feeling for anyone. They don't have grudge for any other people. Then suridaha, good at heart. They want good for all people. Finally, sadhavaha, they are honest. These are some of the signs of Mahat people. Such Mahat people in Bhakti tradition like Krishna Bhakti, they are called Mahajana, great people. They can, if they are really so advanced, if they are really illumined people, they can inspire bhakti in us through a touch. through a look or just by mere wish that we see in the life of many people. For example, Sri Ramakrishna touched Swami Vivekananda and kindled the fire of divine love. There are so many other examples that just by a touch, just by a look, or by a mere wish, suddenly this floodgate of divine love, bhakti, opens in the devotee's heart. My own understanding is this: we are usually attracted to advanced practitioner first, finding many good qualities in them, many qualities which we adore. Then we try to emulate their way of living, and their devotion for God inspires devotion in us. This is how usually it acts when we are inspired by advanced practitioner in our own life, and they exert their influence imperceptibly on us. We don't realize initially how they are changing us for better, how they are shaping our life. But when we look back, we recognize that it is indeed wonderful. It is indeed that it was by their grace that this thing happened, that we came in contact with such persons. And that is why that we find every illumined seeker in the path of bhakti would say that it was through grace alone that they have achieved everything. That is Mahat Kripa. And this aphorism says, or a bit of divine grace. Bhagavat Kripa leshad ba. A bit of divine grace. Divine grace works in mysterious way, often without our knowing. A bit of divine grace can have a huge impact in the path of Bhakti Yoga. After years of practice, as I said, a bhakta feels that self-effort is not alone, is not enough. They feel like they are on a spiritual plateau. That is, they are no more progressing anymore. The initial enthusiasm, the joy, that have kind of become a plateau. They need at that time a quantum leap. And if at that moment, those are the most important moment in the life of a devotee when they are in a spiritual plateau. They need quantum leap, and if they persevere, divine grace gives a further push for that quantum leap. What are the signs of divine grace? Perseverance with spiritual practice and yearning for spiritual growth, no matter what state I am. These are signs of divine grace. Otherwise, one would have simply stopped spiritual practice. That we are struggling, that we are still yearning, even though we are not progressing, this itself is a sign of divine grace. And when divine grace ascends on us, then spiritual life, as I said several times, becomes smooth. We no longer have any more doubt about the path and the goal. We are sure about both. And we know that it's only a matter of time when we reach the goal. And also, holy company or company of the Mahat, this itself is a sign of divine grace. Divine grace works through the company of great people, company of, that is, holy company. Narada in aphorism 40 will tell that the grace of the great people can be had only through divine grace. So if we have the fortune of coming in contact with great people, great advanced practitioners, that itself is a divine grace. So self-effort and divine grace are like two engines. When a train is climbing a mountain, we see that usually, especially for trains which were run by diesel or coal, they needed two engines, one in the front to pull, another behind to push. Then only the train will go, because it is uphill task. Similarly, spiritual growth is really an uphill task, and growth happens only inch by inch. So we require two engines. One is Purusha Prayatna, that is the engine in front, self-effort. And second is Ishara Anugraha, the engine behind, which give us a push. So both should help us reach the destination. And after reaching the destination, however, the devotee would always say that it was divine grace alone that made it possible to reach the goal. That is why we find, interestingly, in Bhagavad Gita, first 6 chapters, Sri Krishna speaks about 3 things. One is, who are you? And your self-effort. And how to do that? Karma Yoga. Atma Sharupam, Purusha Prayatna, and Karma Yoga. Practice is Karma Yoga. Whereas from chapter 7 to 12, this 6th chapter, Sri Krishna speaks about Ishvara Sarupam, who is God. Then Ishvara Upasana, how to adore God, how to worship God. And thirdly, Ishvara Kripa, Ishvara Anugraha, grace of God. This is how these two are interlinked in the path of Bhakti Yoga especially. The summary of this aphorism 38 is, in the path of Bhakti, main impetus comes from the grace of the great people or a bit of grace from God. And in the next few aphorisms, Narada will keep on emphasizing the value of company, holy company, or the company of the great people, Mahat Kripa, that we shall see. Okay. Do you have any question? Okay, let me see. So I will, send the notes, then you can see. Okay. Yeah. Any question? Any comment? Yeah. You may unmute yourself and share your views, questions, if you have any.
Maharaj, you said hearing is different in Vedanta. So as opposed to what is Shravana mentioned here, how is that?
Okay, in Vedanta, Shravana means, as I said earlier, Shravana has a particular meaning, that is studying under a teacher and coming to know that Upanishad only teach one thing, that is Jiva Brahma Aikya. That is called Shravana. Okay, Shravana in Vedanta does not mean only reading or just listening. Reading under a teacher with, and what reading? Upanishads, and coming to the understanding that Jiva Brahma Aikya is the main thesis of Upanishad. This is called Shravana. And here in Bhakti Yoga, Shravana means hearing the name of God, or reading God's name, God's qualities, or God's deeds. This is Shravana.
Okay. Let's see.
Renunciation of worldly things, which takes time, is also one of the important requirements of yoga. Right. That is why Narada mentioned at the very beginning that abstaining from sense pleasure and hankering for that. That is the groundwork to progress in the path of bhakti. Afterwards came these other practices. One is abrabhrita bhajana, uninterrupted adoration of God. Then Shravana and Kirtana. And now came grace of the great people and grace of God.
Oh, Swami,
Yes.
it was valuable for me to hear you talk about the evidence of grace when one is at a plateau, because I think when one's at a plateau, sometimes there's discouragement. And so it was quite heartening to hear that it's an evidence of grace that you continue even
Yeah.
when you're at a plateau,
Right.
because it doesn't seem that way probably a lot
Yeah.
of the time.
Yes. Especially Ashokananda used to say this a lot, that the very fact that you are struggling, the very fact that you are struggling and you are not happy with your progress, this itself shows that divine grace is upon you. Sanskrit phrases for two engines. One is Purusha Prayatna, that is self-effort, and Ishara Anugraha, God's grace. You will find it in the notes. How does one get company of great people? This is really a question. How does one get the company of great people? This is indeed, that is why it is called that company of great people is indeed also happens to divine grace. Divine grace. That really has no answer. How one gets, holy company, because the thing is, holy company alone is not enough. One should be also receptive to it. We find in the life of Sri Ramakrishna that many people came in contact with Sri Ramakrishna, but not all of them really progressed in spiritual life. So many things are dependent, like circumstance, my own state of mind, whether I am receptive to this particular holy company, whether these teachings really resonate with me. So these two connections also should be there. Not that any holy company will really have an effect on me. Okay, that is why it is said that Narada will speak in the next aphorism that holy company, real holy company, is really durlabha, that is very rare thing, which is really holy company and also resonate with me, and also which really inspires me. Uninterrupted adoration of God even during meditation. Yeah, sure, adoration of God even during meditation. How to account for the differential effect of grace on people? Is it grace or lack thereof? How to account for the differential effect? Yes. Exactly. That is what I said. That same great person may not have same kind of effect on everybody. So these two sides of the equations should match. So the seeker also should be receptive. Once the seeker has found out that here is a great person whom I really can rely upon, or whose ideas resonate with me, and as I said, background check of a holy person, background check. background check is one. As I said, a holy person would not advertise, first of all. Second is, usually they come from a tradition. Why? Because it is a proven fact that that tradition has produced many holy people. If someone comes from somewhere, they really may be a holy person, but we don't know which tradition they are coming from and what is the background of that tradition. Okay, that is one thing. Thirdly, take reviews from others. Okay, as we, before purchasing any goods from Amazon, we go for the reviews, how people have reviewed. That is also we need to check what others are thinking about or how others have been benefited from that holy company. In this regard, can you explain about worldly position of the devotees? I could not understand this question. Can you, yes, go ahead. Yes, Lalita ji.
I mean, we've read in the sayings of Sri Ramakrishna, like there are several examples where you might find a poor woodcutter who got the divine grace of Shri, the mother, but he continued to remain a poor woodcutter. Or you can take examples of, Devaki, or several examples. So in this world, there is something like a worldly position that you have. And I know this is not such a complex thing, but can you show the linkage between the worldly position of a devotee and in reality, how does the grace come in?
Oh, no.
The same example of, say, Devaki, who had the divine son, but she was not free from imprisonment. There are several such examples. Or Bhishma, you can take.
Yes. You know what? We are speaking about bhakti. Okay, so for a bhakta, these things won't matter, the worldly position. Okay, so divine grace does not mean that other worldly problems will be solved. Rather, the devotee will transcend the problems. Though those problems will remain, but won't bother the devotees. It's not that if the devotee is poor, after divine grace, the devotee will become rich. Okay, Sri Ramakrishna used to give the example that suppose a office clerk goes to, suppose imprisoned, and after they are released from the prison, what they will do? Will the same go back to their job? So after God realization, or after having this para bhakti, what they will keep on doing? Keep on doing the same thing. So Holy Mother used to say that after God realization, what will happen? Will you grow 2 horns on your head? So you will remain worldly, from worldly perspective, you will remain the same person. But internally, there is a sea change, sea change.
Swami, I couldn't type it into the chat, but I have a question whether surrender could be viewed as a supplication for receiving God's grace.
Yes, right.
Okay.
Right. Can writings of the illumined souls be substituted for holy company? How can one have company of sign? Right. That's why they say that a holy company also means that books, writings of the illumined people, they have a strength in themselves, power in themselves. Okay. But still, there is no substitute for real face-to-face contact or in-person contact. But that is not possible all the time. So we should keep the company of the books. Is God's grace unconditional or depends on our karma? It's both. In the sense that we should be, through our good karmas or practices, self-effort, we make ourselves ready for divine grace. And why we call it grace? Because what we get in return far exceeds than what we are supposed to get. Okay, so in a sense, it is divine grace, so there is no logic behind it. In another sense, divine grace depends upon our self-effort, how much we make ourselves ready to get the divine grace. And we find that some of what we got in return was way beyond what we really were, or what we deserved. Okay, so they are both related. How to enhance self-effort? I'm not happy with my self-efforts, at the same time not able to increase my efforts too. So that is surrender to God. Surrender sincerely to God that I want to do more. I am not happy, so make things favorable to me so that I can do more. Okay. This is the solution. All right. So this topic will continue. This is merging in knowledge also leads to divine grace. Yes, merging knowledge is also divine grace. Ultimately, although we say that in path of wisdom traditions, the divine grace, the emphasis on self-effort, but masters like Acharya Shankara and others of Jnana Yoga path, they also say at the last, even in Brahma Sutra commentary, Acharya Shankara says that this illumination, Atma Jnana, happens through divine grace alone. Even in Kathopanishad, it comes, Yamai Vesha Binute Tena Labhya. Whom the Atma chooses to manifest, they alone come to know about it. So divine grace in the sense of, they are not saying that God with any particular form has given me this illumination, but there is a sense of, a sense of overwhelming appreciation. Overwhelming. For example, I am reading the life of Ramana Maharshi now. So there his emphasis was always to inquire, who are you? If you are asking the question how to get realized, so ask the question, inquire, who is really asking the question? This was his real only method, vichara, inquiry. But he says that up to some point, you can keep on inquiring. Then something happens. Where you don't have any control over. So he also believes in that something mysterious happens, which is mysterious in the sense that you have no control over it and it overwhelms you with what you get. So they also believe in divine grace. So merging in knowledge is also divine grace. All right, this important topic will continue